Hi, this is Patty Fong. I'm the Chief Academic Administrator in Lakota Local Schools. This PowerPoint was designed to help parents understand Ohio's new learning standards and the new assessments that our students will take beginning in 2014-2015. The state of Ohio has required that all districts be in full implementation of these new standards in the year 2014-2015. Lakota has decided to work ahead of this timeline a bit so that our teachers and our students have some time to work and learn under these new standards before those assessments come into play. So this year in 2012-2013, students in grades K through 2 are in full implementation of new standards in the core content areas. That includes English Language Arts, which is your reading and your writing, mathematics, science, and social studies. Next year, in 2013-2014, students in grades 3 through 8 will be in full implementation of those standards in all 4 of the content areas. Students in grades 9 through 12 will be in full implementation in English Language Arts and mathematics. In 2014-2015, we will then add in full implementation in science and social studies for grades 9 through 12. So we'll be ready for those new assessments in 2014-2015. The curriculum that we teach to your children is made up of standards. And standards are statements that describe what your child should be able to know and or do in every subject in each grade level. The standards make up our curriculum documents. We also have curriculum materials that support the learning of the standards. An example of that would be a math textbook. So while we don't use the math textbook to guide our teaching, we use the standards to guide the teaching, and the math book supports students' learning of those standards. Here you see an example of a 4th grade math standard, and this is one of the new standards. As you can see, it's very complex and it has many layers to it. The teachers in Lakota this year are involved in learning all about the standards. We're doing what's called the what of the standards. And in this work, teachers are looking at these new standards and they're breaking them down into manageable pieces. And we call this process deconstruction. And in deconstruction, teachers are identifying the ultimate intended learning for the student. And within that process, they also break these standards down into manageable pieces for students so that it's almost a progression where students build to mastery of a standard. This allows for some differentiation because not all students will start in the same spot in their mastery of a standard. These new standards are based on college and career readiness. There are 2 sets of standards that have been combined into one. So the Common Core standards are standards that have been written on a national level and they've been adopted by 45 states to date. The Common Core includes standards for English Language Arts and mathematics. And then Ohio, the Ohio Department of Education, has written new standards for science and social studies. So the Common Core standards in English Language Arts and math and the Ohio Revised standards in science and social studies are now together, and they're all called Ohio's New Learning Standards. So when you hear Ohio's New Learning Standards, or ONLS, because we like acronyms for things in education, ONLS is all 4 content areas: English Language Arts, math, science, and social studies. These new standards are designed to be end-of-the-year learning expectations for students. So where our current standards, we can divide them easily up into quarters. Here's what your student needs to master first quarter, here's what your student needs to master second quarter, and so on. These standards are going to be end-of-the-year learning for students. So they'll be working on most of these standards for an entire year. And what this means at the elementary level, if you have a child who is in grades K through 2 now, you've seen a new report card. It's a new standards-based report card. A new standards-based report card will be used for students in grades 3 through 6, not in 2013-2014, but in the next year, 2014-2015. These new report cards, rather than giving A, B, C's, D's, we assign a numerical scale. And those numbers help you as a parent understand how your child is working towards mastery of that standard. So currently on the kindergarten, first and second grade report cards, if your child receives a number 1, that means they're not quite on track to master that standard by the end of the year. A 2 means your child is doing well at progressing towards mastery at the end of the year, and then a number 3 means that your child has already mastered that standard. So the way that we report that information to you as a parent will change also. There's a link to a video clip here that gives some information about why we have new national standards, why they were developed. This video is also on Lakota Online under the Video on Demand tab. It can also be found on the Ohio Department of Education. If you watched that video, you saw that as a nation we're not doing an adequate job in preparing our students for life beyond high school. According to the ACT, which is a college readiness, college entrance exam, only 28% of our students nationwide are proficient in all 4 content areas. That means those students who are not proficient have to take remedial college coursework. That means that students are actually enrolling in college courses in which they're not receiving credit towards a degree. So it's not a great use of students' time, it's not a great use of money. These are things that we need to be teaching our students before they leave high school so that when they get to college, they're ready to jump right into college level coursework. These statistics are also broken down by the content areas, as you can see here. So it looks like as a nation we're doing the best job in preparing our students for college level English, language arts, and we're doing as a nation, again, these aren't just Lakota statistics, we are not doing a very good job at all in preparing our students for college level science coursework. When we look at what kinds of jobs are going to require more education in the future, you can see that in 2018 it's projected that almost 2/3 of the jobs available to our children are going to require some college work or more. So a while ago, back in the 70s, many of us were able to find jobs that paid well without a lot of education. The ability to be able to do that is decreasing. So we need to make sure our students are prepared and able to get those good jobs. When we're talking about college and career ready, we're not just talking about students who will be going to college, because we know that not all students want to pursue opportunities that need a college degree. Some of our students will want to go into technical and trade skills. Other students will want to enter the military. These new standards are going to prepare our students for any option they choose. Right now, the most recent data is showing that nearly 23% of students nationwide are not able to pass a military entrance exam. So almost 23% of our students are denied entry even into the military. When we're talking about trade and technical fields, we're not preparing our students to be able to do the level of reading that's required in a lot of those areas. And we're not preparing them to give them the work skills that they need to be successful. So we're talking about college and career readiness with these new standards. The authors of the Common Core define students who are college and career ready by these criteria. They're students who can demonstrate independence, they have strong content knowledge, they are able to respond to varying demands of audience, task, purpose, and discipline. They can comprehend as well as critique. They're students who value evidence. They use technology and digital media strategically, capably, and ethically. And they're able to understand other cultures and perspectives in order to function and work well in a global community. So what does this mean for your child as a reader? There are 6 big shifts in the standards in the area of English language arts. The first big shift is there's going to be an increase in the amount of informational text that your child will be reading. And informational text, it's more than just nonfiction text. Informational text could be a blog. Informational text could be a journal entry. It could be a magazine article. So there's going to be a shift in the percentages that students will be reading between literature and informational text. And we'll talk about that more in just a moment. There will be an increase in grade level text complexity. We're seeing that, you'll see here in a few minutes on the next couple of slides, that we're not preparing our students to read to the level that they need to be reading when they enter the workforce. So we need to bump up that text complexity level and make sure that we're equipping our students with skills they need to make sense of complex and difficult text. There's an emphasis on text-based answers, so it won't be adequate anymore to rely on how you felt by reading something or what your personal response was to reading something, but we're really going to be valuing evidence and having students draw evidence from reading to support their claims. There's an emphasis on academic vocabulary. If you think about the content areas such as math, science, and social studies, each content area has its own unique language, and students need to master this language in order to master the content area. So what we're telling teachers is that we're all language teachers, because students have to understand the language of mathematics in order to be successful in mathematics. Students have to understand the language of science in order to be successful in science. The fifth shift, in writing, we're looking for evidence-based writing and using different sources for writing. So there will be an emphasis on writing through reading and writing in all content areas. The last shift, literacy instruction in the content areas. This is something that educators have been hearing for a while, that we're all going to be reading teachers, and in a sense that's true, but it's not just that we're all going to be reading teachers, we're all going to be literacy teachers. So whether you're a science teacher, a math teacher, a social studies teacher, or an English teacher, we'll all be teaching students how to read, how to write, how to listen, and how to speak within that content area, because each content area has its own unique processes for learning to read, learning to write, and different ways to do that and apply those skills. Here you see a chart that shows that first shift, which is the increased reading of informational text. So if you have a 4th grade student, it's about 50-50. So half of their reading during the school day will be literature and the other half will be informational text. By the time they leave us after 12th grade, they'll be reading 70% informational text during their school day. Here are some examples of informational text. I mentioned a few before, but as you can see from this list, it's more than just nonfiction. So if you're wondering as a parent, what can you expose your child to so they get used to reading informational text, here are some ideas. And many of these can be found free online. When we're talking about text complexity, which was one of the shifts in English language arts, we're talking about increasing the reading level of material. A Lexile framework, it measures the readability of a test. It's a mathematical formula that takes into account the number of words on a page, the difficulty level of vocabulary on the page, and it assigns a numerical scale to that. The scale goes up to 2,000, so that's the highest Lexile level. If you look at the first row, in our high school courses, we're typically requiring students to read at a Lexile level between 700 and 900. But if you look at the Lexile levels of the reading that they're required to do after high school and in real life, that level is much higher. So even when we're talking about reading for personal use, that could be a tax form, it could be an insurance form, it might be a legal document. The reading ability that students need to be able to read and understand and make sense of that is much higher than what we're asking them to do now. So we need to increase text complexity. You'll see how we're going to do that on the next slide. So the new Common Core standards, or Ohio's new learning standards, the Lexile ranges are going to be increased. So the red bar shows you what the old Lexile ranges are, and the blue shows you what the new Lexile levels will be. So by the time your student is in 11th grade, the Lexile level that they'll be required to read at is much higher than what they're currently reading at now. As a parent, you can find out about Lexile levels at the library. If you talk to the librarian, many times they'll be able to show you how to find the Lexile level of a book. Oftentimes it's printed inside the cover, especially in children's books. There's a website that you can search that will give you a Lexile level if you type in the title of the book. When you're reading with your child at home, if they're reading independently, you want them to read at their independent level. That means you don't want to give them a book that's so difficult that it frustrates them. When we are teaching them reading in class, or if you're helping to teach them how to read at home, then you want to work on what's called their instructional level, which is slightly above their independent level, because that's where we stretch them and help them grow as a reader. And we do that by asking them questions about the book, getting them engaged in the book, having them find evidence to support their answers in the book. And through those discussions and that rich conversation and helping students make their way through that reading, we can help increase their reading level. So we do that through a student's instructional level. The next major shift, we talked about academic vocabulary, and the new standards break those words up into 3 tiers. Tier 1 is just your everyday words. Tier 2, that's your general academic vocabulary, and those words could be found in any content area. So they're academic words such as classify, analyze, compare. Tier 3, those are your content-specific words. So those are your science words, your math words, and your social studies words. So, in summary, when your child is reading, they need to be able to read like a detective and write like a conscientious investigative reporter. Dr. David Coleman is one of the authors of the Common Core Standards, because again, it's evidence-based, it's valuing that evidence and having students go back and prove how they know, where they found it, and being able to, in writing, use many different sources in their writing. So what does this mean for your child as they learn math? This chart shows the learning progressions of the new standards. There are new learning progressions for English language arts and math. The example we're showing here is just for math. A learning progression, it's a pathway that a student travels as they progress towards mastery of the content. And under the new standards, you've got a K through 5 band. These are your foundational mathematics skills. Counting and cardinality, numbers and operations in base 10, and you can read the others here, geometry, measurement, and data. In the old standards, that foundational band ended at 4th grade, and then students jumped into a new band in 5th grade. So what this means is that 5th grade has now become a capstone year because it's the end of the learning foundational years. And those foundations, it's important for students to have a very solid understanding of those foundations before they progress to the next band, which now will be grades 6 through 8, which is your pre-algebra band. Those are the skills that students need to master in order to understand algebra and the other mathematics areas once they hit high school. So what this means is we're going to be looking at how we do compacted curriculum for students who are in advanced math differently. The authors of the Common Core have recommended that no compacting of curriculum happens before 6th grade because those foundational years now stretch through the end of the 5th grade. What compacting curriculum is, that's when students who demonstrate that they have advanced skills in math, they can speed up their learning so that they're ready to take Algebra 1 as an 8th grader. And those students who are in advanced math, when they take Algebra 1 as an 8th grader, they will be taking that for high school credit, which means that grade goes on their high school transcripts. So whenever we're talking about advanced math, we want to make sure that we're setting students up for success in those compacted courses. And we'll have more discussion about that as the year goes on. The 6 shifts in math, there's going to be a deeper focus. So rather than teachers teaching many different standards and just giving surface level knowledge, teachers are going to be going narrower and deeper into the standards. So there are fewer standards and students get into them at a deeper level. Coherence means that there's a very clear pattern of consistency between grade levels. So students are to build foundational skills in the prior level that they will then apply that learning to the next grade level. So a very clear coherence between grades K to 12. Fluency, that's being able to do math quickly and accurately. So there's going to be an increased focus on fluency, which could be something as simple as students being able to know their math facts quickly and accurately, so that they're not slowed down in their mathematical learning and understanding by trying to recall facts. Deep understanding, that just basically means that rather than learning the tricks behind getting the right answers in math, students are actually going to know the processes behind the math. Number 5, application. That means that students are going to be able to take what they're learning in mathematics and apply it to other content areas. It also means that they're going to be able to take mathematical skills from one area of mathematics and apply those to another area. And dual intensity means that students are practicing and understanding math at the same time. Something else new in the mathematical standards are these standards for mathematical practice. And these standards, they describe the varieties of expertise that mathematics educators at all levels should seek to develop in their students. And these practices rest on important processes and proficiencies. We also call them the habits of mind for a mathematician. You may have heard them referred to as essential understandings of math. But these standards span from grades K all the way through mathematics courses that students will take in high school. These standards will work alongside the mathematical content standards because we want to develop students who have these habits of mind as a mathematician. So you see them here. One example would be attending to precision in mathematics. And when we think of precision, we think about getting an answer correct. But it's more than just being able to get an answer correct, but it's being able to precisely and accurately convey your understanding to one another. So these standards for mathematical practice begin in kindergarten, and students will practice them as they move in through high school mathematics courses. We talked about how there's an increased focus on fluency. For the first time in a long time, we now have grade level fluency expectations. So we know that a child who is in second grade should be able to add and subtract within 20, add and subtract within 100 using paper and pencil fluently by the end of second grade. And they need those skills as foundational skills before they move on to third grade, where they have to be able to multiply and divide within 100 and add and subtract within 1,000. So students will be practicing mathematical fluencies. So how will your child be affected in science and social studies? We talked about the literacy skills a little bit that are going to permeate all the content areas, how all teachers are going to be asked to teach literacy. As you may or may not know, each discipline requires unique forms of reading and writing. So if you think about science, for example, students have to be able to read a lab report and understand what that means and make sense of it, and they have to be able to write a lab report. They have to be able to talk to their teacher, and they have to be able to talk to their classmates about that lab report. And they have to learn how to apply those listening skills when students are reading and talking about lab reports. So each content area or each discipline has its own unique forms of reading and writing that teachers need to be able to teach students so that they're successful in that content area. In grades K through 5, those literacy standards run parallel to English language arts standards. When a student enters 6th grade, in grades 6 through 12, the literacy standards are actually in addition to the content standards. So a social studies teacher, for example, will have social studies standards, and then they will have literacy standards that they'll teach right along with their social studies standards. It's the same for the science teachers. Science teachers will have science content standards that they teach, and they'll have literacy standards that they teach along with their science, so that their students are able to read, write, listen, and speak about science proficiently. In the science standards, there is a focus on scientific inquiry. Also in engineering, if you have a child who's in the elementary grades right now, you may have heard about the engineering is elementary curriculum materials that we're using. And those are designed to give students some knowledge about the field of engineering, and then technological design, which means that students are able to use technology to work, to design, and to be able to use it appropriately and ethically. So when we're talking about inquiry in the science standards, that's where students can conduct investigations to ask and answer questions about the natural world, but using evidence to be able to derive those explanations, and asking the teachers and parents asking children, how do you know? How can you prove what you know? In social studies standards, the social studies curriculum is going to promote historical thinking and civic participation. The new standards give students the opportunity to actually read historical documents for themselves. So rather than simply opening a textbook and always relying on someone else's account of history, there's going to be a renewed effort to get students into those original documents so that they can read and interpret history on their own. And then the social studies standards will also include a financial literacy piece so that we can help students be smart consumers, and that they will be able to handle themselves appropriately when it comes to handling financial matters. Now we can start talking about the new assessments. Just as the standards are two different sets of standards, one for English language arts and math developed by the Common Core, the others in science and social studies developed by the Ohio Department of Education, the assessments are similar. There are two different groups. So you've got your Park developed assessments. Park developed assessments in English language arts and mathematics, or those Common Core state standards. The Ohio Department of Education developed assessments for science and social studies, and all the assessments are now lumped together under this term called Next Generation Assessments. So when you hear Next Generation Assessments, we're talking about English language arts, math, science, and social studies. So the Next Generation Assessments include English language arts and mathematics, and these were developed by a national consortium called PARC. These are aligned to the Common Core state standards. Students will be assessed in grades 3 through 8 in both English language arts and mathematics, and these assessments will replace the current OAA or Ohio Achievement Assessment. In high school, students will take end-of-year exams instead of just the OGT. So end-of-year exams in English language arts will happen in English 1, English 2, and English 3 courses, and in math they'll take end-of-course exams in Algebra 1, Geometry, and Algebra 2. And these new assessments will begin in 2014-2015. The Next Generation Assessments also include Science and Social Studies, and these were developed by the Ohio Department of Education. So students in grades 5 through 8 will take a science assessment. Students in grades 4 through 6 will take the Social Studies assessment. There are also end-of-course assessments for high school students in these two content areas. In science, students will take end-of-course assessments in physical science and biology. In social studies, they'll take end-of-course assessments in American history and government. And these will begin in 2014-2015 as well. These assessments will be mostly computer-based. You'll see some examples of the prototypes that have been released here in just a few moments. There's also a paper-pencil component to these assessments, so it's a blend of students working on the computer and then students writing their answers the way they do now. The Ohio Graduation Test, or the OGT, is being phased out, and it will be replaced by the end-of-course assessments and a test for college and career readiness. This test for college and career readiness will also take the place of OGT in addition to these end-of-course exams. The current proposal on the table now is that students will take this assessment in their 10th grade year. This test itself will also be a new indicator on the district's report card so that we can show how we're doing in preparing students for college and career readiness. Let's take a look at what these new assessments will look like. What you're about to see are simply prototypes that have been released. The actual assessments are still in the development phase, but the developers are showing us some snippets of what to expect in these new tests. Here's an example of a question that students saw on the Ohio Achievement Assessment in 2010. They were asked to identify a character trait that could be used to describe a character named Moss, and they had to state an event from the selection to support those traits. The next slide, you'll see a new assessment item that addresses a very similar standard. So here's a PARCC prototype that assesses a very similar standard. This is a grade 6 question. In Part A, they're asked to choose a word that describes the character. Parts B and C, they have to find a sentence within that passage that supports whatever word they chose in Part A. And they actually have to click on that sentence, they have to drag it and drop it into the box. Here are some math examples. On the left, you see a mathematics question from the 2011 released OAA. On the right side, from the 2006 released OAA. The question on the left is assessing students' ability to be able to put numbers in order from least to greatest. On the right, you see a question that's assessing their ability to round to the nearest hundred. Well, let's see what those two same skills look like in the new prototypes. These new assessments put a big emphasis on real-world application of knowledge. So in this question, this is Part A, a 4th grade student is told about these different baseball stadiums and how many seats are within the stadium. They have to drag the tiles to arrange the stadiums from the least to the greatest number of seats. Here's Part B of the same question. This is where they write in their answer book. So you see the stadium seats again, not rounded, and then you have two students, one student named Jeff, one named Sarah, and they're talking about how they rounded these numbers and what they came up with. And the student taking this assessment has to look at Jeff's answer and Sarah's answer and explain if they can both be correct even though their answers were a little different, and then explain how they know. So it's extending and applying what they know about rounding numbers and being able to critique and analyze the work of others. Here's Part C of that same question, and as you can see again, the student would write the answer in their answer booklet, but it's still assessing students' knowledge and ability to round numbers to the nearest hundred. Here's an example of a 7th grade math item. If you look in the bottom right-hand corner, you can see the actual standard. So this is 7th grade ratio and proportion, standard number 3. Students have to be able to use proportional relationships to solve multi-step ratio and percent problems. So the question is asking students about designing a new set of coins. So again, what they would consider to be a real-world application of their understanding of the standard. Here's another 7th grade math sample item, and this is again asking students to drag and drop, and they're being asked to look at 4 different charts or tables and interpret that information in order to be able to rank these objects from the greatest speed to the least speed. Students are also going to be asked to do performance tasks on these new assessments. Performance tasks are going to require students to demonstrate their understanding of standards through a project, through a performance. This is an example of a performance task for math, and this performance task is talking about a family who's trying to save money and energy using insulation in their house. This company that provided the insulation claimed in their advertising that if they had their house insulated, they would save at least 10% a year on their energy bills. So after this family has the insulation put in, the mom starts to get the energy bills, and when she's looking at them, she sees that the cost is actually not as different as she thought it was going to be. So she starts to wonder if this investment was really worth it, if they would really truly save 10% on their energy costs. So students have to take into account all of this information. They're given some websites and resources and places where they can go in order to help them come up with the answer, but the students at the end have to decide if this family's investment paid off or not. So this is just one example of a performance task. So now that you've seen how the new standards are different and you've viewed some of the assessment prototypes, you're probably feeling a bit overwhelmed, and you may also be thinking or wondering how you're going to be able to help your child as a parent. Well, one of the things that you can do is to make sure when your child is picking out books to read for fun at home, to make sure they're picking out books at the appropriate Lexile level. So if it's something that they're going to be reading all on their own, again, it should be at their independent level. If it's something that you're going to be reading and discussing with them, choose something that's slightly above their independent Lexile level. And by working through material that's more difficult with them, you're going to help stretch their knowledge so that they're able to grow and read independently at a higher Lexile level. One of the other things you can do as a parent, I've got a link to an article here, and the article is called Struggle Means Learning, Difference in Eastern and Western Cultures. And the gist of this article is something that's very important for us to think about when our students and our children are working under these new standards. Our culture has always tended to put value on students who know the answers right away and students who don't have to struggle through something in order to make sense of it. And students who can achieve those goals quickly, we often tell them that they're smart because they knew something right away. Other cultures in the Eastern Hemisphere, they put value in that struggle because they know that that's where the real learning occurs. So it's not about knowing the answer quickly and getting the answer right immediately, but it's about persevering and working through those processes of learning so that you're able to get to mastery at the end. So I hope that you take a look at this article. It's very valuable and very valuable information in here for us as educators and parents, because we're all going to have to help our students and our children with these shifts so that they're not getting frustrated and not wanting to give up. And I believe that there's some information in here that will help us understand how we can support them in this new learning together. Thank you so much for taking the time to go through this presentation and being an active part of your child's education. We really appreciate our parents and the support that they give our schools because we're all working together so that our children have the best future. If you have any questions at any time, don't hesitate to contact me by email. Again, thank you so much for your time, and I hope you have a great day.